speak this year, and I know it's been an extraordinary year for all of us, and I look forward to seeing you all in person. I'm really honored to be asked to speak today. This has been a conference that I have followed from afar when I was in a previous job, and I always had thought, boy, I really want to join this group of women and women leaders to talk about some of the issues that we're facing, and particularly in this sector. I wanted to start off the presentation. I have a small, short mini presentation, but before getting into that, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the macro issues that are facing women in our industry today, and more broadly in the public policy sphere in Washington, D.C., and then talk a little bit about my career trajectory and some of the takeaways around women leadership that have been helpful to me from mentors that I've learned from along the way. My distant cousin is Amelia Earhart. So I am going to start this presentation with a quote from her. "Some of us have great runways already built for us. And if you have one, take off. But if you don't have one, realize it is your responsibility to grab the shovel and build one for yourself and for those who will follow after you." I think that's an inspirational quote. She was obviously a very inspirational figure, a pioneer among women. And she really has been a hero to me, someone that I admire at a time when not a lot of women were in leadership roles or really being pioneers in the aviation sector. And I think of the kind of women leaders that have inspired me over time, and also some of the men who have inspired some of my success along the way. So with that, I'm going to tag team a little bit with Megan. We were having some logistical issues around my PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to have a very short PowerPoint, but then I'll have a discussion with some of you and look forward to some of the question and answers. So Megan? Okay. We would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the kind of year that we have all had with all that has gone on in the news media, all that has gone on in our country with COVID-19, the political discourse and debate, the Black Lives Matter movement, the election cycle that seemed to be endless, and certain other pioneers like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away, and a new Supreme Court justice, a woman, taking her spot. It's been an extraordinary year for all of us, and actually the next slide. On top of the sort of tremendous things that are happening along our country, this is basically my kitchen table. So when COVID-19 hit, and we're almost to the year anniversary date where I think a lot of our lives changed exponentially and overnight, I think many of you probably relate to this photo. Actually, I think my kitchen table is a little more messy than this and has a bottle of wine for the end of the day. I think I was looking back today at the anniversary, it was probably the second week of March, where literally I was in the office on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday, we were working remotely. And at the same time, my children's school was shutting down. And at the same time, the impacts to the industry were literally exponential. I was hearing from industry across the textile industry, places were closing down, orders were being canceled, all at the same time as my children were trying to figure out virtual learning in this really new paradigm. And something really scary was happening across the country about a disease we didn't know much about. We didn't know how to contain healthcare workers on the front line who didn't have enough PPE. But a lot has come at us this year, and I think we all have to take a moment to acknowledge the kind of stress that has been on our lives, personal and professional and otherwise. And so while much has been happening on the national stage in terms of political discourse and debate and discussion, there's a lot happening in our own homes. Next slide. And sorry if there's a little bit of a delay here. When I've sat at the perch of NCTO, our biggest grouping of new member companies are actually women-led companies, and I couldn't be more thrilled about this. Watching women leadership emerge this year from a variety of companies, whether I'm talking about the Garment District of New York or companies based in Ohio or South Carolina, I have seen tremendous response from women who pivoted their businesses to making the PPE our frontline workers needed. I also have been heartened by just everybody stepping up, both women and men in this sector. We've seen extraordinary efforts by our industry because the PPE supply chains broke down to try to respond to this existential crisis. And it takes innovation, it takes the ability to sort of jump into the deep end. But at a time when the country was calling out for PPE and health industry, including women, both at the leadership level, but at the mid-leadership level as well, was a real testament to this industry. Our industry made front page national news in a pretty significant way. Our voice was very loud. It was great to be acknowledged by the highest levels of our government for what our industry did. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the extraordinary efforts, not just across our industry, but across the women leadership in our industry. Next slide. Speaking of beyond just our industry, here in Washington, and actually I'm visiting family in South Carolina, but I work in Washington, and watching women leadership, it's not just impacting industries like ours, where opportunities are growing for women. Women are becoming more part of in key decision-making roles, but we're seeing it also at the national stage. We now have 142 members of Congress elected, both Republican and Democrat, that are women. This is an all-time high. We are seeing more women donate to members of Congress. We are seeing more donations going to women candidates over men candidates for office. We're seeing women are aspiring to the highest levels of leadership in their state and in the halls of Congress. We're seeing in this particular administration, they have made a key point to try to elevate women and people of color to some of the highest positions within the cabinet. So it's a real energy around getting diversity of opinion and thought and leadership at the highest levels of our government. But the next slide will show you that even though a lot has been achieved in Washington and even at the state level for women in leadership, there still are significant discrepancies. I don't think I need to share any of this with you that you don't already know already. But that being said, we're one of the most highly educated part of the workforce. Comparative to men, we have more undergraduate and master's degrees. We make a significant part of the US labor force. But when you actually peel back the onion, you find that women aren't in all the senior leadership roles. We're still fighting to get into the C-suites or into the boardroom or even into the halls of Congress. And while certain significant achievements have been made, there's still a long way to go for all of us and for our daughters moving forward. For every 100 men promoted, 85 women are. And the discrepancies are even worse among women of color and those from the LGBTQ community. So next slide, Megan. In terms of the pay discrepancy, even among women in our industry and across other industries, for the same amount of work, we're still making just 82 cents for every dollar earned by men of all races. You can take this and you can equate it out across different kinds of sectors of our economy, from the service sector to the manufacturing sector. And this has had a profound impact. In fact, there was an unemployment report earlier this year that all the job losses associated with that report that year were women leaving the workplace. Now, whether they were leaving the workplace for voluntary reasons because they were trying to take care of a family, a loved one, there's been a lot of pressure on women this year to step up in a variety of roles, or because of what was happening to the economy. I'm only flagging this because, I think this is a great celebration for women leadership, and to think about ways that we can support each other in our overall goals or share some of our experiences. But the reality on the ground is there's still so much work to be done. And with that, Megan, I'm actually going to click out of this presentation and talk a little bit about my own experience in Washington. I know it was touched on in my resume about some of the places I worked over the years, but maybe I could share a little bit about my experience. I came to Washington right after college. I was inspired to work for a member of Congress from my hometown. I wanted to work in a field where I thought I could make a difference for my community, and felt like this was my moment to help change or shape Washington, as a young idealist, young woman coming to DC. And it wasn't easy. I'll be honest with you, a lot of the women who worked on Capitol Hill worked as staff assistants, or which are folks who answer the phone, or schedulers for members of Congress. And fewer were legislative assistants, people who handled the policy issues for members, or legislative directors was even a smaller universe. And then you get to chief of staff, and it was very, very sparse in terms of members of Congress of both genders having a female chief of staff. I had started on the Hill 20 years ago and was bound and determined to work my way up. And I am grateful that I worked for bosses, my members of Congress, who actually looked for opportunities for me to grow and promoted me. But I also had to fight for myself. It is Washington sometimes can feel like an insider's game, and I was an outsider coming from a small hometown community. So you have to learn really quickly how to navigate that particular system. And I will have to say that I had great mentors that were men along the way. So I worked for my hometown member of Congress. I went on to, as he was retiring, I went on to work for actually a mill worker, paper mill worker from northern Maine, who drove a forklift truck and ran as a member of Congress himself. And from there, and I ascended to the Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director role. But when I compared my salary to others who are in the same profession as me in other member offices, I recognized they were making more than I was. So I actually took that information to my member of Congress, and he made that adjustment automatically. I had found that I needed to fight for myself to ensure that there was equity in the I obviously was working very hard. I was working just as hard as my male counterparts, if not harder, but recognizing you have to fight for yourself, and that there are biases that still exist. And there's reasons why I think sometimes there's a pay discrepancy. Have you fought for yourself? Are there other underlying issues? I was lucky enough to ascend to a pretty high level position within a member of Congress office. And then I ended up serving in the Obama administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary at Commerce. And I'm lucky to represent the US textile industry today. I learned several key things along the way. My mentors have meant a great deal to me. And many of my mentors over time were men who hired me, men who promoted me, men who adjusted my salary, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes when I brought those issues to them along the way, that really inspired me and believed that women should be given key positions and be part of the overall discussion and help lead the way. I also feel like speaking up for yourself is really important. There was an article in the Obama administration where when there was an Oval Office meeting, he would bring in a grouping of advisors, and there was a sort of an unspoken code among the women that when they were speaking with him in a mixed group with men, that they would sort of reinforce each other. So someone would bring up one policy point and another woman would just reaffirm it, so that it would be a counterweight to some of the other things that may have been said in the room. So even in a Democratic or even a Republican administration, I think figuring out how to not only just speak up for yourself, but recognizing that you're in the room for a reason and your voice is so incredibly important to the debate and the overall discussion. The other thing I learned along the way is to fight for yourself, and to also fight for what you believe in, generally. I think women are passionate leaders, and it's important that you not only speak up around certain key issues for yourself, but also just speak up in general. When I ran the Blue Green Alliance, I hired more women than I did men, not because that was intentional, but I really felt like some of the candidates that I was speaking, the emerging leaders, were fantastic to interview, but also really did speak up for themselves during the interview process. And I was really impressed with that next generation that's coming behind me. I'm part of what I would consider a transitional generation, between periods of time. I'm in my mid 40s, so I've seen sort of a paradigm over time where when I started, what Capitol Hill was and what it looked like is very different from where we are today. So there's a lot happening in Washington in the discourse space around some of the key issues. My view on it is a diversity of opinion, and oftentimes how women think and what they can contribute to the discussion may be slightly different than one of their male counterparts. But it's important as part of the overall discussion that we hear a variety of perspectives so that the best decision-making can be made. And that includes hearing from male counterparts and others as well. I've been very fortunate throughout my career. I've been very heartened to work with some really great leaders that I've learned from and have been inspired by. I'm thrilled to be asked to speak to you all today, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time. Don't be shy.
Kim, thank you so much. That was so wonderful to hear how your work is helping not only women realize what they can and cannot, ask for, but also to empower them to keep moving ahead in their lives. That's amazing. I'm trying to see if there are any questions that we could ask.
One question I actually have for the audience, and I'm not sure, or for you, is, what are your reflections on how to get more women in textiles in leadership roles across various companies? That's something I'd like to see. I'd like to see more diversity in general, and I don't know if anyone has any takeaways or thoughts associated with that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Personally, I think a lot of women see themselves, and me personally, it was just for me, I saw myself in a box of like, I can do this, and this, these are my strengths, but never really thought of exploring other areas of my expertise. So when I took up my new job at Milwaukee Tool, which, by the way, the company, when they interviewed me, I thought they were joking and they weren't a company. It was a spam call because I'd never been to Home Depot. I'd never really heard of the company. And then they needed somebody in PPE last year in January. So that was like such an apt time to say yes. And last year, and even like years to follow, I have at least adopted myself saying yes to more opportunities and not really second guessing myself and having that imposter syndrome that, oh, am I actually qualified to do this? Because sometimes it doesn't matter. It's like showing up is half the battle. And then if you have to figure it out on the job, that is totally fine too. But I think a lot of women, we should encourage them to be leaders in what they do, because I don't think they realize how much strength they have in them to actually step up to the plate. So yeah, I want to know from people, like, how do you think we should have more leadership in textiles who are women? Thanks, Jenny. Lyndon.
Can I cheat? Is it okay if I cheat here?
Yes.
Considering I'm the speaker, I know how to like pop in. So first, I want to say I have worked with Kim for a number of years now, and I don't think she knows this, but she's one of those women that I idolize and really look up to as being someone who's doing incredible work and is brilliant and knows how to hold herself and compose herself in a room in a way that draws people in with so much curiosity and wanting to talk to her. One of the, I think, joys of the beginning of COVID, I know that sounds horrible, is the number of conference calls I was on with Kim, who was doing incredible work bringing the government together. And I continuously laugh at the number of moments when we're literally on the phone with the White House or really critical agencies, and I've got a 4-year-old in the bathroom yelling that, she needs help on the toilet. And like this multitasking that we were all in the depths of was really incredible. But Kim, I typed in a question here, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to this in terms of just framing the problem and reminding folks about like all of those facts that you shared at the beginning, because some of the pushback that we've received about this conference in general is whether or not there is a problem and whether or not there's a problem in this industry. And our response has basically been, this is a leadership cultivation summit, and we weren't seeing enough women show up at our other leadership cultivation opportunities. So we wanted to carve out a space where they knew there was an expectation, not just an opportunity, but truly an expectation that they needed to step up and participate. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about that dynamic of folks, particularly women, who are saying this isn't a problem, we are treated equally, versus reminding folks of the facts of where we're truly at right now. And how do you balance that?
Yeah, first off, Lyndon, thank you for the really kind remarks. We were all in it together, and to be honest with you, it was a triage in the spring. And as a result of some of those phone calls that you were on, Lyndon, and dealing with a 4-year-old in the background, it really actually helped get our industry back to work and hiring of more workers in our industry to help with the PPE crisis in a way that was really inspiring and continues to inspire me and so many others. I don't think women have to be apologetic for talking to each other about the state of affairs in their lives or what they're seeing across their sector. This sector is no less unique than other manufacturing sectors when you actually look across the horizon. If I look at the steel industry or the aluminum or paper or tire or rubber, you'll find the very same dynamics. And the fact that you have staked out that women need to be part of a discussion, a leadership discussion amongst themselves, and that's really important for the future of our industry, is a real testament to you. We need this kind of discussion to be happening. It's actually not happening enough. And when I look over the horizon and when I see that more women leaders have joined NCTO this year than probably any other year, I'm really heartened by what's coming. And I think that's a result of conversations like this that are happening. And I think it's other women who are feeling like, I really want to be part of this industry, long term. This is not a short-term job. I want to be here for a while. And I really like this sort of networking opportunity. So I do think that, no one ever wants to say, yes, we're paying women less at our company, or they're not in the C-suite, or we're not providing opportunities. No, nobody would probably say that, but are we cultivating enough leadership from the bottom up as well? Enough training, enough opportunity? Are women staying in this sector as long as they should be to help build, sort of their resume and future? And are we taking on some of the tough conversations as well? So it's probably a combination of all of those things. And, that's why I was so inspired by this grouping. I have been following you through some of my dear friends like Jane Johnson for quite some time. And I thought, this is excellent. This should be replicated across every kind of industry. I really appreciate your leadership.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I think we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Do you think, Kim, being passionate and vocal in a male-dominated leadership organization could backfire?
That's a good question. I think it's the opposite. If I didn't say or didn't fight for the industry in a passionate way, I think that wouldn't be respected. I actually think it's the opposite. I know sometimes we as women measure our words. How do we say something? Do we come off as angry? Will we, are we rocking the boat too much? But I think for just watching this, when I started, no one interviewed me and said, what would you do in a pandemic? And never during the pandemic period of time when life was crazy for all of us, did I say, gosh, what should I say this because I'm a woman, or what would my job is to represent and advocate for this industry. And that means having some tough conversations from time to time and being very direct with my board of directors, which happen to be about 85% male or 90% male. So I think people respect strength, and as long as you're passionate and they know you're on your side and you're fighting for them, I think that opens many, many doors. And I think I've gotten to the age where, I think I worried about some of that stuff in my 20s and 30s. And now I'm of the age in my 40s where, I'm just like, this is who I am. and you hired me. And I'm going to do the best job I can to represent you. And from time to time, there'll be a disagreement, even among some of my members. But it's always best to be honest and frank with them and sort of give them a sense of where the world really is on a particular issue, or to say that you disagree with them and why. I think people respect you more for being true to yourself.
Absolutely agree with that. I think a lot of the anxiety of women speaking up and sounding bossy or dominating comes when we're much younger. I think I feel the same way now that I'm like almost 32. I feel like, okay, you hired me to do this and you want me to tell you the truth and tell you what possible solutions are. So here they are. You can choose to see it in the lens of like, an expert is telling you this or a woman expert is telling you this. So those are the two choices. Another question is...
And I also, can I just say one thing too? I wanted to be hired at NCTO because I was the best candidate. And I believe I was hired because I was the best candidate. I wouldn't want NCTO members or the board to hire me because I was a woman, right, in this role. That I wanted them to see past that. And I think ultimately, absolutely, that was part of their decision making. So I'm flagging that for you because I feel like they hired me to be passionate and to be an advocate for the industry and to have their back and be honest and truthful and call it like I see it. And, I'm really heartened because a lot of my board members have been mentors to me, and I'm really appreciative of all their support.
Yeah, same. I think I was hired in my job to be the expert, to tell them what it is. And also, I think being a woman, I don't think we should discount ourselves of bringing in a fresh new perspective. Like a lot of the times when they look at textiles, they think of textiles in a more industrial way. But sometimes when you explain a concept. Like you have to tell them like, oh, this is lightweight like lingerie, or this is heavyweight like your seatbelt fabric. So I think women have that variety of reference that a lot of the times men miss. So I am not, I wouldn't be remiss if they offered me the job, because I was an expert and also a woman, like bringing in, I work in the construction industry, which is like my first day at the job, I looked around, I was the only woman in the entire floor. And in the Midwest, which is very common. So now we've started hiring more women and more people of diversity. So it's been a very refreshing change. But I think no matter what reason you hire people for, as long as they're helping you reach the goal, I think that should be the attitude when they get hired. I think we have a question on economic policy. Having worked on economic policy and manufacturing, do you see this American-made shift happening?
So I do, but how sustainable will it be is a key question moving ahead. I know this was part of one of the small breakout discussions. Someone said they were in the Made in America group. You know, I think the industry is very eager on certain essential products to bring that back on shore. We're starting to see more N95 production, nitrile gloves, other kinds of PPE. I think you're also seeing some onshoring of specialty apparel and other areas that people are willing to spend a little bit more for quality products. But the key question here is, what will the Biden administration and Congress do moving ahead around some of these essential products? We're hearing everyone wants to make things in America and we need to have more resilient supply chain. But without the right policy tools in place, I fear a lot of this will go offshore. There was a reason some of this went offshore 20 years ago, and price was a predominant factor. And you're seeing now that if you talk across the industry about PPE production, which was an essential part of many of our industry's business in the spring, now it's such a small percentage of their business. Some of that business has started to come back to normal. But, you know, we're starting to see the flood of imports coming in from China and elsewhere. And I worry about the long-term trajectory. I don't want Americans, I don't want the administration or Congress forgetting about what our industry did here. That we can't let this happen again. We were beholden to supply chains that simply just didn't deliver and broke down. Who knows what's on the horizon? God hope it's not another pandemic anytime soon. But the reality is this is probably going to become more, this kind of thing is probably going to become more frequent over time based on the analysis that is done. So, you know, I'm a little worried about companies who have invested during this pandemic in certain essential products. You know, we've seen reports about N95 masks just sitting there, not being sold to anybody in the New York Times recently. So it's a key part of NCTO's work, and we're working with, you know, some of our other industry association counterparts to help push this Buy American platform and making sure U.S. taxpayer dollars go to incentivize investment in our plants and the purchasing of USA-made product.
That's wonderful. Our next question is, what advice do you have to improve self-advocacy for women who might fear self-promotion?
This is probably the most delicate conversation, right? Because you're thinking about, gosh, you know, I maybe earn this promotion. I'm surprised no one has come calling. You know, I should be there's a vacancy here. I should be the likely candidate. Why is someone not calling me? Or you're looking around and like, gosh, I think I should be probably making similar to this salary because I think so-and-so is making this and I've been here about the same period of time. I think being very clear about your goals, about what you, where you want to go in a company, what your trajectory is, and actually having an honest discussion with whomever is making the hiring decision about what that pathway could look like if you start getting a bunch of non-answers, and it's not real clear that they are thinking about you in a different way other than the position that you're in, I think that's a good signal to say, you know what, maybe I've spent enough time here and I should move on. I did during my last job, I was negotiating they had offered me the job and I was negotiating my salary, and I knew when I looked at comparative organizations what the other salary structures were for nonprofits and for leadership in nonprofits, similar to size in terms of budget. And I just drew a red line, and I just said, if you want me, you'll get here. But if you don't, that's okay, because, you know, I can go pursue other opportunities. There were some times that I knew when to hold in the negotiation. You don't ever want to negotiate against yourself, you know, in terms of salary or position. And if you feel like there's not an upward trajectory, or you haven't been able to have an honest conversation with your boss or whoever's, you know, whoever's doing the hiring or promotion internally, I think that might be a signal to you, you know, that there might be other opportunities out there. And I know in our industry, it feels like, just talking to folks in our industry, they have a lot more vacancies generally. And maybe this is at, you know, the hourly wage level, but even across some of these companies, that they are looking to try to promote talent. And I know industry does move around quite a bit in different companies. So never be afraid to draw a red line from time to time, and never be afraid to actually have an honest conversation. I think people respect you for advocating for yourself without being all self-promotional. It's fine to advocate for yourself. No one else is going to do it but you sometimes. And so don't let those moments pass you by. And if you don't think that something else, organizations, when I've had staff come to me about promotions and salary adjustments and things like that, and you know, really have always appreciated when they have flagged those issues for me.
That's very good advice. If you don't advocate for yourself, no one is going to advocate for you. So I think that's really good. I've also read somewhere that men ask more times for raises than women do. So I guess if you're thinking that there is a position that you're better suited for and you haven't been checked in with, I think it's a good time to go in and have an honest conversation, like you said. Our last question is, how can we help our daughters be leaders of the future? Right?
That's a big question. Just getting to the last question, the one thing I forgot to say is I have found in my career that if you want to really go for a job, and I have found that some of my male counterparts have been more aggressive in the sense that they'll get others who may know the CEO or may know the decision maker and have that person weigh in. Where sometimes women are a little more hesitant to use their network to say, hey, do you know so-and-so? You know, and so I've been on the receiving end in a hiring practice where I've seen some of the, you know, when I've hired, it's come between a male candidate and a female candidate. And just anecdotally, this is not, you know, every single hire, but I've watched sometimes, you know, the male candidate will stack up 4 or 5 calls going into me from different people. And I don't think, you know, that hasn't happened as aggressively on the other side. Doesn't mean that person doesn't want the job anymore or that they're any more qualified. It's just use your network, understand who's in your network and who are good people that you've developed relationships with who can help you achieve some of your goals, and make sure that the person who's hiring you understands the kind of overwhelming support that you have. In terms of for our daughters, I think about my daughter all the time. She is 10, and I've watched her in this whole pandemic period of time. And I have also watched her watching me. She's been much more tuned to my work because we're all living in the same, in virtual learning and sleeping in the same environment. And I probably have been more attuned to her eyes and her ears this year. How I'm speaking to somebody on the phone, how I'm interacting in a Zoom call or in a conference call like this, that I always want to set the example for her and for my son. This is not about what it really means to be dedicated and passionate about what you do. I feel like the best thing that I can do is teach by example. And, you know, and I recognize little eyes and ears. I take the time to sit with my kids, especially on a tough day. They might hear a tough phone call from time to time or hear my frustration on something, to explain what is going on. Don't think that your kids not only aren't hearing you all the time, but like aren't processing how you're feeling about something. And during this pandemic, I think, especially because, you know, it's been a lot for all of us. Sometimes tempers can get a little short, or you can get a little irritated at your kids just in general because you're all sharing such close space. That I'm reminded of the fact that these are real teachable moments, because I don't think my child ever, after the vaccine is fully deployed and they're back to school, will ever have this experience being so close to my work and what I've done. And I want my daughter and my son to know that women can achieve all sorts of great things and that there are no limitations. And so I'm inspired as much by you than any elected women leaders across our government. I think it's wonderful that you have a forum like this to have this kind of discussion. And I'm sure that a lot of you have daughters and sons. And, you know, it's really inspiring that you're doing this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Kim, to spread all this positivity and empowerment with us. And I am going to keep an eye out for you, because you are definitely, like, I'm always seeking empowered women leaders to follow, to inspire me. So I'm going to take a page out of Lyndon's book and keep an eye out for your wonderful achievements. And we thank you for being our speaker who closes our summit today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to everybody here today, and hope everyone's doing well.